I wasn't fully explicit in previous videos with why I thought Annie would be interested in the polar bear den. Polar bear dens are an issue in locating usually oil mining. Maternal polar bears den usually in snowbanks, although dens on sea ice and in grounded icebergs are not unheard of. According to this recent Washington Post coverage of the issue, even under the best conditions, locating a polar bear den is difficult. Infrared technology often cannot detect their heat signature under a meter of thick ice, and mothers sometimes dig as deep as 4 meters. The same article notes, oil operators search for dens to comply with a federal requirement to build roads and facilities at least a mile away from the hibernating bears, whose shrinking populations are designated as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And while we're on the topic of the ESA, did you know the U.S. government considers polar bears a marine mammal? This is another association we have of the bear to water, in addition to the images in the opening credits of the bear swimming. It seems increasingly likely that a certain indigenous American nature goddess with dominion over sea creatures will be represented by the one-eyed mama bear. In Annie, searching for the den in order to force the mining company to relocate further from Ennis or potentially close down altogether seems like a very plausible motive for her searching for the polar bear den. But this episode threw a real wrench into that theory with the powered lighting in the cave. I feel like I should take all of my chips off the table on Annie. I can't think of anything the show has hinted at that she could be looking for other than a bear den. But I also can't think of a reason there would be artificial lighting near the bear. A bear would be too dangerous to anyone setting up and maintaining the lighting. Maybe this is supposed to be a complete misperception on the part of Danvers and a red herring to the audience. Maybe in some kind of Ennis-induced misperception there actually was no lighting beyond the cell phone flash, and maybe a secondary handheld flashlight that Annie was carrying. It makes me much less sure about all of this. That said, the fact that Danvers is extremely drunk in that scene and has her judgment impaired is emphasized in several pointed ways, including opening with a shot of her drinking, noticeably slurring her speech, and loudly being called drunk by Navarro.
Are you drunk?
Well, it's the same in the Annie video.
But even as Annie's case has gotten less certain, I am more convinced the men died during a polar bear swim ritual for a kind of men's group at the research station, one that was interrupted by the actual mama polar bear. For one, we see Jules fold her clothes in a similar way before going into the icy Arctic water. This seems like foreshadowing together with the other clues we have. And I also did a little outside research into polar bear swim rituals. I thought perhaps they actually were some kind of real Native American spiritual ritual practiced by circumarctic tribes. You may be familiar with the practice through American media's coverage of things like the Coney Island Polar Bear Club's annual swim. This is what gave me the impression that it was primarily an American tradition, possibly an ancient one adopted from indigenous peoples. It isn't. At least it isn't American. But it is an ancient tradition of indigenous peoples, just those in northern Europe. Ice water swims on or near the winter solstice are a tradition that originated in Scandinavia, just like one prominent founder of the Tsalal Research Group. That said, the tradition is practiced widely across northern Europe, including places like Germany, thus the significance of Otto Heiss. I also briefly note that we may be seeing a suggestion that the men were potentially on drugs when they did the ritual. I've been suspecting that, but I was waiting for a reference to drugs to mention it in my videos. I guess the drunk driving didn't register with me, although that seems like an intended reference to mind-altering substances now in hindsight, and the fact that Danvers smoked marijuana also didn't really sink in. But this episode, we see Otto with a set of drug paraphernalia. Another aspect of my theory that I perhaps was not as explicit in explaining in my previous videos is that I believe Oliver Tagaq taught Lund about the spiral because they were close friends, hence Tagaq's emotional reaction to the news of the death of the researchers. He probably considered them as family members. There's a lot of symbolism attaching men to dogs and wolves in Night Country, and it is meant to emphasize the social aspects of men as running in packs. While on the topic of the show's spirit animals, women are of course associated with the mama bear. And it is possible that in addition to the spiral symbolism, Tagaq may have also contributed some kind of native hallucinogen to the combined ritual that he created with Lund. The spiral is a real Native American symbol that appears frequently in petroglyphs, but not in the Arctic. They are common in the Sonoran Desert of northern Mexico, an area Issa Lopez likely visited on one of the expeditions to an archaeological site that she mentions taking with her father as a child. I suppose it is possible that another tradition of the Sonoran tribes may have been transplanted to the Arctic by Issa's fiction, namely peyote or some other possibly fictional hallucinogen. Polar bear swims are of course potently symbolic of the main theme of the season in my analysis: women as mothers and men as sons. In the case of a swimming hole cut in the ice, you would have naked men literally emerging from a watery hole. While the imagery is very direct here, I should also note that water is considered a feminine symbol similar to darkness in traditional mysticism. There seems to be a relation between ice swims and the hypothesized neo-pagan Yule myth, which involves the annual cyclic death and rebirth of the male pagan deity in late December. And I think that despite the deaths of the scientists, the cross-cultural friendship between Tagaq and Lund will be portrayed in a very positive light, one that respects both indigenous peoples and European immigrants, and demonstrates how something good like Salal's research can come from the combination of these cultures. I see it likely that some piece of Tagaq's indigenous knowledge will be key in allowing Lund to pursue his research and create Salal, making the station's work represent a true combination of indigenous and Western knowledge. And a couple more things about polar bear swims. The founder of Coney Island Polar Bear Club was a man named Bernard McFadden. He also was the founder of a magazine named True Detective. But even more oddly coincidental, I just noticed on the wiki page that the South Pole's Antarctic Research Station does a polar bear swim as a, quote, rite of passage, unquote. Seems pretty conclusive. I have more to say about some of the themes in this episode, but it looks like we are getting part 5 on Friday night. That's right, it might already be out on Max, so go check it out if you haven't looked at the schedule. Be sure to subscribe to get my take on the developments in that episode, and consider hitting the like button. Oh, and consider supporting Polar Bears International. Their real Arctic biologists did a lot of the research I talked about in this video, and they are having a special donation matching event on February 27th, coincidentally a couple of days after the scheduled finale of Night Country. This has been Shiva's Right Foot, and I'll talk to you next time.